Hey guys, Buildzoid here, and this is just going to be a demonstration of voltage rollover on a Ryzen 5 7600X. I've decided to make this video because this is a really convenient, voltage, rollover demonstration that I just sort of stumbled across while testing the 70, delidding the 7600X, and so right now the chip is delidded. There's liquid metal under the IHS, and there's also liquid metal on top of the IHS because I did do a direct die attempt without a direct die frame, and that went really badly. Not in terms of, I couldn't get it to boot. I did manage to get it to boot eventually, but the thermals were a disaster. So there's an IHS on there, and there's 2 layers of liquid metal. But anyway, so yeah, I was messing around with this setup. I was just running Cinebench, and I ran into voltage rollover. Relatively quickly at not even that insane temperatures, because what voltage rollover is when you're overclocking and you're raising the voltage in order to improve stability at high frequencies, the idea is basically if you just apply more voltage to the transistors, you can switch the transistors on and off faster. The side effect of this higher voltage is, of course, increased power consumption and higher temperatures. Now, the rollover, the voltage rollover effect, is due to the temperature component of increasing voltage, which is a consequence of the increased power consumption. But basically, the 2 limiting factors for what frequency a transistor in a CPU can run at are just what voltage is being applied to it and what temperature is it at. And what you run into with voltage rollover is at some point, the temperature is going to be so high that no amount of voltage is going to get the transistor to switch in the amount of time necessary for the frequency that you're trying to run. And this 7600X in Cinebench is a really convenient demo for that. So as you can see right now, I have it overclocked to 5.55 gigahertz on all of the cores with 1.4 volts. And if we run Cinebench right now, it will just kind of run. We're going to pull up the temperatures over here, and you can see we're just under 90 degrees. It'll probably end up above 90 degrees towards the end of the run. If you're wondering what this over here is, this is the water temperature of the 280 millimeter AIO that I'm using. And the way I'm measuring that is there's a K-type thermocouple just stuck to the hot side of the radiator for the AIO. So we can see the water temperature really quickly climb up as the CPU dumps power into or heat, which is a type of power. It's not a very useful form of power, but it technically is. But yeah, so it dumps heat into the AIO, and we can see that in the water temperature coming up. And as soon as the load finishes, you'll see the water temperature very quickly start coming back down again. Give it a second. There we go. Yeah, so you can see the water temperature starts coming down. Anyway, so that maxed out at 91 degrees Celsius. The benchmark ran. We can even run it again. Starting with a higher water temperature this time, which we might be kind of pushing it, but we should be okay. And now the only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to raise the voltage, and it's going to stop being stable. And admittedly, Cinebench is not a stress test. If, this is stable for Cinebench. It's not stable as in, I would want to play games on this all day. Because I would be kind of suspicious that some games, asset decompression, would potentially get this to fall over. So, it would crash on a loading screen or something. But anyway, so yeah, it runs Cinebench. Water temperature got all the way up to over almost 28 degrees Celsius. The neat thing with the 7600X is yeah, it runs very hot, but it actually doesn't produce that much heat. So even a 280 millimeter AIO, the water temperature stays very low. For comparison, a 13900K can get the water temperature in this AIO up to over 40 degrees in a single Cinebench pass, which makes sense because it produces 4 times, more 3 times as much heat as a 7600X. But anyway, so, yeah, 5.55 gigahertz runs just fine. I don't really feel like waiting for the water temperature to come down further, but unfortunately the fan speed's kind of low. I guess we can do this this way. So we're going to bump the voltage up to 1.42 volts. Also, during both of those Cinebench runs, we maxed out at 92 degrees Celsius. So really nothing that, it's not super crazy high, right? Like, yeah, we're getting up to that 95C thermal throttle point that Ryzen has built in, and then the thermal shutdown is at 115, if you were wondering. So that's like the really hard cutoff for temperatures on Ryzen 7000. But the funny thing about that 115 degrees Celsius thermal cutoff is you can't really get to it because you're not going to be stable even at like under 100. Depending on the chip, you're potentially not going to be stable even below 100 degrees. So we bump it up to 1.42 volts, which we're not actually running at 1.42 volts under load because I have a relatively droopy LLC here. So yeah, but even then, like, it's not the point. So now we're going to run Cinebench, and initially it's going to be okay. At least it should be for a little bit. And, you know, temperatures don't look that bad just yet. It's not that much higher than before. And it crashed. And if I lower the voltage back down again, right, and the thing is, like, the temperature we're seeing in hardware info isn't even that high. And yeah, you could argue, like, oh, it's because your update rate is once every second. So I'm not on some crazy high update rate for the sensors. But the thing is, like, I don't think that would make a difference, because the thing with these temperature sensors is you can't have a temperature sensor on top of every single transistor inside the CPU. You just can't. Modern chips have a lot of sensors in them, right? Like, if you look at, like, the hotspot temperatures on AMD GPUs, that is not, like, one specific area of the chip. That is the hottest area anywhere on the chip out of a... I want to say there's like 1,000 temperature sensors in modern AMD GPUs, but I'm not 100% certain about that off the top of my head. Ryzen CPUs would very likely be pretty similar, where you'd have a whole bunch of temperature sensors, and the temperature reading that you actually get in software is just the highest of those temperature sensors. Anyway, so the temperature really didn't look that crazy high. But now if we run Cinebench at, you know, just 1.4 volts, and we've lowered it, we're going to run kind of similar temperatures. Like, the water temperature isn't going to be drastically lower, but this time it's going to pass. Because the problem is, when we bump the voltage up by, you know, 20 millivolts, sure, the temperature, like, and the thing is, it's not even the average temperature of the chip. Like, the temperature we're seeing in hardware info is already some kind of, like, finer, you know, area of the chip, like some kind of a hotspot temperature in a way. But it's not necessarily the hottest transistor in the chip. It's just kind of a measurement of the general hot area of, like, a general hot area inside the chip. It's not necessarily the hottest transistor in the chip. And the problem is, at 1.42 volts, that hottest transistor might be significantly warmer than it is at 1.4. And at 1.42 volts, it can no longer run 5.55 gigahertz because it's just too damn hot. Whereas at 1.4, the temperature of that transistor is low enough that it can actually run 5.55 gigahertz. And we can't just brute force it with more voltage. If anything, more voltage should make it just crash even faster. So if we go up to like 1.45 volts, right, and we try to run Cinebench with this, I don't think we're going to get very far at all. And okay, now we're hitting 100C, and it just immediately crashes now, right? Because again, we just very quickly hit the thermal limit of some transistor somewhere, and we can no longer run 5.5 gigahertz because it will just not do the frequency. And if I just lower it back down to 1.4, it's going to run Cinebench again. Like, this really isn't, you know, it's not super complicated, but this is a very real, like, problem with a lot of modern silicon, and it's the reason why a lot of modern silicon doesn't just scale to, like, insanity voltages. If you look at something like FX CPUs or old Intel Sandy Bridge CPUs, those chips would scale to, like, the point of dying, basically. Especially Sandy Bridge CPUs. FX CPUs were kind of indestructible in a way. They'd blow up your motherboard before the CPU itself was at risk. But the Sandy Bridge CPUs weren't. You could very easily, like, see frequency scaling on a Sandy Bridge CPU all the way to like 1.6 or even 1.7 volts on water cooling. And at that point, those chips start dying. Cinebench almost looked like it froze, but no, it's still running. It doesn't seem to be running particularly great. No, the score is still good. Yeah, so that's the thing. So in the past, like, this wasn't really an effect that you would necessarily have to worry about, because on old CPUs with big transistors, you didn't have really nasty small hotspots, right? Because that's the whole issue here, is like the chip density keeps getting higher and higher and higher. Transistors are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, so now your hotspot is like way smaller than it used to be, and so it can be a lot hotter than it used to be. And even in the, in the temperature readings that you might see in your monitoring software, it might not look that bad, but you could already be well past the point of like negative like voltage scaling, where it's like any more voltage just causes worse overclocking performance rather than better. Now, if I lower the voltage to say 1.38 volts, we shouldn't be able to run 5.55 gigahertz, because instead of being thermally limited, we're going to be voltage limited, right? Like, it's quite the balancing act there, where it's like you need just enough voltage to run the frequency you want to run, but you still need the chip to be cool enough for the frequency to run. Though I've not tested if 1.38 is not enough, but I'm relatively certain it isn't enough. I'll look pretty stupid if it is enough. I'll feel pretty stupid. I mean, we can just keep lowering the voltage until it stops working. The main point was to show that at, like, at some point, more voltage is going to just cause more problems rather than less problems. And this is also the main reason why, like, modern NVIDIA GPUs don't scale with voltage, is because they have very, very nasty hotspots that don't show up in, like, temperature monitoring. Are you kidding me? It runs 1.38? Wait a minute. Can I run higher frequencies at 1.38? Because, like, my whole goal with delidding the CPU was, like, I really wanted to run 5.6. I might have been... Oh, nope. Yeah, nope, that won't do. And I guess if I raise it to 1.4, it still won't do. And that's the thing, right? Like, at some point, you're gonna hit the basically the thermal limit of the silicon, where it's like more voltage makes it worse, less voltage doesn't make it better. Yeah, no. Actually, that crashed even faster. Wait. What about 1.36? I have doubts. I have serious doubts that that's going to help, but... Oh, very interesting. Yeah, so it was actually rolling over even at, like... That's crazy. Like, it really hates voltage. It's still crashed, so yeah, I don't think... Well, I mean, we can keep lowering the voltage. Like, until it starts crashing earlier, it's like we're seeing negative voltage scaling, basically. But that's just because I evidently was running way too much, because I kind of rushed it with the actual, like, tuning process. Like, how did I get to that 5.55 gigahertz at, like, 1.4 volts number? I kind of skipped a lot of steps. Mainly in the sense that I wasn't really, like, I wasn't tuning the voltage based on, like, what was necessary to maintain stability, but I was tuning it based on, like, well, my temperatures aren't that high, so it should be fine, right? No. Right? You'd think, like, oh, the chip's under 90 degrees. Like, the voltage is fine. It's under 90. How could it possibly not be fine? Okay, but I think at this point we might have reached where it, like, isn't happy anymore. So I guess 5.6 is not happening. Actually, you know what? No, let's keep going down. Let's see, 1.32. Because the thing is, like, the chip does clock better just because it's cooler. So maybe it just needs very little voltage. But the cooling benefits aren't infinite, so... I'm very surprised, though, that we can run at all at 1.32 volts. Wait, don't tell me this is actually going to pass. That's insane. No. It just... Like, we're not even running that hot. Like, it maxed out at 80 degrees. 80! Like, if you can, like, the stock boost algorithm drives the chip to freaking 95 at any opportunity it gets, and the chip, like, doesn't even, like, it's not even scaling at freaking, like... Okay, so we can do 5.7. Man, okay, maybe I can do 5.6. Please. Also, our water temperature sensor. There we go. Oh. Wait. Oh, I think that crashed. Yeah, the water temperature is coming down. I'm pretty sure the CPU just hard crashed. Yep, it did. Yeah, so I guess, but still, like, it can do 5.57 at, like, no voltage. But main point of this video is, like, more voltage does not necessarily mean more better, especially on a lot of modern silicon where and the thing is, this is going to keep getting worse, right? Like, as transistors keep getting smaller, the hotspots are going to be more and more of a problem. So this kind of, like, if you, like, this kind of like negative voltage scaling that you get past a certain point is going to become more and more commonplace. I think it's still worth showing, like, what happens if we just keep lowering the voltage at, like, 5.55, because right now it might look like, oh, if you just keep lowering the voltage, frequency just keeps getting better. And no, that doesn't work that way. So we're going to go all the way down to, like, 1.25 volts with, like, 5.555, right? Which is a very low voltage. And if we try to run that, it's supposed to crash. This isn't fair. Okay, there, it died. So yeah, like, so yeah, I definitely totally overshot it with the voltage at the start of the video. That's what I get for, like, not being patient with my tuning process, is, like, I was running way more voltage than necessary. And I was losing frequency to it. Yes, I was losing, like, 25 megahertz to it, but I was losing frequency. And then, but at the same time, it's like, you can't just keep lowering voltage and the clock will just keep going up, because it doesn't work that way, right? You need just enough voltage for the frequency you want to run, and then you need to keep the temperature as low as possible. And you also need the temperature to be low enough for the frequency you want to run. Anyway, because the thing is, if we ran, like, a worse cooling system at 1.25 volts, well, we wouldn't be able to hit the frequency we're running at right now. Right? Like, if you take the cooler off the CPU, it won't run any frequency, because it'll be thermal throttling constantly. And if you overrode the thermal throttling process, it would just crash. Yeah, anyway, so that's the point of this video, is just, like, I wanted to just make a demonstration of, like, voltage rollover. That wasn't, like, because in the past, the main place you would encounter, like, I would encounter this effect was, like, LN2 overclocking, where you're pushing very, very high voltages, insane amounts of power consumption, and on LN2, like, the chip going back up the chip internally hotspotting is, like, a very real concern, because you're pulling way more power than it normally does, right? Like, you'd easily be at, say, double the power consumption that you run at ambient, so any internal thermal bottlenecks are, like, kind of twice as worse, in a way. Whereas at ambient, this is not really an effect that you usually see on anything other than, like, NVIDIA GPUs. Because even AMD GPUs, even modern AMD GPUs, generally still scale with voltage, like a pretty decent amount. Not indefinitely, not as much as some of the old like 28 nanometer cards where you could just you could take like a lot of 28 nanometer GPUs would chip with a stock voltage of like 1 point something volts to like 1.2. A lot of them will scale to like 1.4, 1.45. And at that point they consume like 3 times the power that they originally did from the factory, and it's just like not even remotely practical, but they just scale to insane voltages. Whereas with most modern things, you very quickly hit a point where like more voltage is actually not more better. So yeah, anyway, hopefully this is at least like interesting, if not particularly helpful. Also very much unnecessarily long. And yeah, so I guess thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. There's a link to that down in the description below. There's also the AHOC Teespring store where you can pick up shirts, hoodies, posters, you know, the usual YouTuber merch. And I've also got a Bandcamp. There's a link to that down in the description below if you'd like to check that out. And yeah, that's it for the video. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.